The day he came back, the wind never stopped howling. It wasn't a storm. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, and the sun hung dull and tired behind a curtain of dust. The air was dry, heavy with the taste of iron and old sorrow. The same dry wind had blown the morning he married her. The same wind had followed him when he rode off to war, and now it carried him home. Daniel Mercer rode into town, wearing the same faded brown duster coat he had left in, the hem still frayed at the edges, still torn near the right boot, where barbed wire had caught him weeks before he departed. His black hat was sun-bleached along the brim. His red bandana, once bright, remained tied around his neck, now dulled by months of sweat and dust. The Colt revolver at his hip hadn't changed position. Neither had the quiet in his eyes. But something else had changed. The town went silent when they saw him. No one expected him back so soon. And that was the first crack in everything. He had married her under this same sky, on a day when dust rolled through the empty streets and gathered in the folds of her simple grey dress. Martha Hale, widow of a ranch hand who died under a runaway horse, stood before him in that plain, grey cotton dress with sleeves rolled to her wrists. She wore a white apron, stiff with flour from baking bread that morning. Her dark hair was braided tightly down her back, and she had not removed the thin silver ring from her first marriage. She had simply slid Daniel's ring beside it. 7 children stood behind her, 7 thin faces, 7 sets of wary eyes. He hadn't married her for love. He married her because no one else would. Because winter had been cruel, and 7 hungry mouths do not survive on pride. He married her because when he looked at those children, Tommy in suspenders too, short for his growing frame, Eliza clutching her rag doll in a faded blue dress, twins, Samuel and Scott in matching brown shirts patched at the elbows, quiet Ruth in a cream pinafore, stubborn little Henry with dusty boots too large for him, and baby Clara wrapped in a wool shawl despite the heat. He saw something the West had almost forgotten: hope. And hope was expensive. He moved into the small ranch house on the edge of town. The wooden boards creaked the same way every night. The single oil lamp flickered the same way every evening. The dry wind scratched against the windows the same way it did now. Nothing about that house had changed. Not then. Not yet. He worked the fields by day, fixed fences, carried water, taught the boys how to hold a rifle but never how to shoot at a man. Martha cooked in that grey dress and white apron every morning, flour always dusting her sleeves. She never changed her braid, never removed either ring. The children began to laugh again, and that was dangerous, because when peace feels possible in the Wild West, something always comes to collect. The war announcement came on a Thursday. Riders brought the news in sheets of dust and urgency. Men gathered in the street, hats low, jaws tight. The wind did not change. Daniel stood in that same brown duster coat, red bandana at his throat, and listened. He didn't hesitate long. He kissed Martha on the forehead. She was wearing the grey dress and white apron, flour on her hands, braid over her shoulder. The children clung to his coat, small fists twisting the fabric. He promised them he would return before the dust settled. He mounted his horse and rode out under the same grey sky. The wind swallowed him whole. And then silence. Months passed. The wind never stopped. The sky never cleared. The ranch remained locked in that same dry season, as if time itself had frozen. Martha worked harder. The grey dress grew thinner at the elbows, but remained the same. The apron remained white, though stained faintly with soil and tears. The children wore the same patched clothes. They grew, but their clothes did not change. The town grew restless. Whispers started. Because a woman alone with 7 children is vulnerable. And vulnerable things attract wolves. Elias Crowley arrived 3 months after Daniel left. He wore a black vest over a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled high, suspenders tight across his shoulders. His boots were polished, too polished for a town coated in dust. He claimed he was there to help. He brought flour, tools, smiles. He stood too close when Martha spoke. His eyes lingered too long on the children, on the ranch, on the land, and every time the wind blew, it sounded like a warning. But Daniel wasn't there to hear it, or so everyone thought. Because what no one knew, what would break the West in two, was that Daniel had not gone far. The war ended quickly for him. An ambush, a miscalculated flank, a bullet that grazed his shoulder but missed bone. He watched men fall, watched loyalty dissolve in smoke, watched orders given by men who would never bleed for them, and something inside him hardened. He rode back without waiting for dismissal. He rode back without sending word. He rode back with a silence that weighed heavier than his revolver. He reached the ridge overlooking his ranch at dusk. The same gray dusk, the same endless wind. Smoke rose from the chimney. That was good. But then he saw another horse tied to the fence. Black saddle, silver stirrups. Not his. His grip tightened. He rode closer. And that was when he heard laughter. Not children's laughter, a man's, inside his house. Daniel dismounted without a sound. The brown duster coat brushed against his boots. The red bandana fluttered once in the wind. He stepped onto the porch. The door was slightly open. He heard Elias Crowley's voice. "And you can't keep pretending he's coming back." Silence. Then Martha's voice, steady but tired. "He will." A pause. A chair scraping. "You've got 7 children," Elias said. "They need security. They need a man who's here." Daniel's hand moved toward his revolver. Inside, the oil lamp flickered. The boards creaked under his step. The door swung open. Every face turned. Martha stood near the table in her gray dress and white apron, flour still dusting her sleeves. Her braid hung exactly as it had months before. The children sat behind her, wearing the same worn clothes. Elias stood too close to her. Too close. Daniel's voice was low. "I told you I'd be back before the dust settled." The wind howled through the doorway. The children froze. Then Henry whispered, "Papa," and everything shattered. Martha's eyes filled, but she did not move toward him. Why? Why didn't she run to him? Daniel stepped inside. Elias straightened, adjusting his black vest. "Well now," he said lightly. "War must not have wanted you." Daniel ignored him. His eyes stayed on Martha, and then he saw it. A bruise along her wrist. Faint, yellowing, old, but not old enough. His jaw tightened. "Step outside," Daniel said to Elias. Elias smiled thinly. "This isn't your house anymore." The wind grew louder, and the children began to tremble. Here's where the West held its breath, because Daniel Mercer did not draw his gun. He took off his hat instead, placed it on the table. "I'm only asking once," he said. Elias reached for his own revolver. The sound that followed wasn't a gunshot. It was Tommy screaming. The oldest boy lunged forward, grabbing Elias's arm. The gun fired into the ceiling. Dust rained down. Samuel and Scott tackled his legs. Henry bit his wrist. Eliza threw the ragdoll at his face like it was a weapon forged of fury. 7 children, 7 small warriors. Elias shoved them off violently. Ruth hit the floor. Clara began to cry. And that was the moment Daniel moved. Not for pride, not for anger, but for the line that had been crossed. He struck Elias hard enough to send him through the table. Wood splintered. The oil lamp fell but did not extinguish. The same flame flickered stubbornly. The fight was brutal, silent except for breath and bone. The wind outside screamed like the land itself wanted blood. Elias managed 1 punch. Daniel gave him 10. Finally, Daniel dragged him outside by the collar of his black vest and threw him into the dust. The entire town had gathered. No one spoke. Daniel stood over him, brown duster coat flowing in the relentless wind. "If I see you near my family again," Daniel said quietly, "there won't be a town left to witness what happens next." Elias crawled away, humiliated, defeated, but not broken. And that was the second crack in everything, because wolves don't retreat. They circle. That night, under the same gray sky and endless wind, Martha finally stepped toward Daniel. She was still wearing the gray dress, still the white apron, still the braid, the same rings on her finger. "You shouldn't have come back early," she whispered. Daniel's heart stopped. "Why?" Her eyes drifted toward the children sleeping together in the corner. Because he wasn't the only one. The wind howled harder, and Daniel understood. The town had been watching, waiting, calculating. 7. Children meant land eventually divided. A widow meant opportunity. Men had come with offers, with threats disguised as kindness. Elias had only been the boldest. The West hadn't broken because of betrayal. It had broken because survival had become uglier than war. Daniel stepped outside again, looking at the town gathered in shadow. They weren't cheering. They weren't apologizing. They were measuring him. And Daniel realized something terrifying. He had fought soldiers across state lines. But this was his real battlefield. The next morning, under the same gray sky and cutting wind, Daniel put on the same brown duster coat and tied the same red bandana around his neck. He didn't ride away. He walked into town, and one by one he knocked on doors. Not with violence, with presence. He repaired fences without asking payment, helped old men lift beams, delivered water to homes that had once whispered about Martha. He stood in the street, visible, unafraid, unyielding. He reminded them what a man protecting 7 children looked like. Days passed. The wind never stopped. But something else did. The whispers. Because the West doesn't break from gunfire. It breaks when good men stop standing. And Daniel Mercer stood. Elias left town within a week. The other wolves followed. The ranch remained dusty. The boards still creaked. The oil lamp still flickered the same way every night. Martha still wore the gray dress and white apron. Her braid never changed, but her eyes did. One evening, as the sun struggled behind the same curtain of dust, Daniel sat with all 7 children beside him on the porch. Tommy leaned against his shoulder. Eliza rested her head on his knee. The twins argued softly. Ruth held Clara. Henry stared at the horizon like he was guarding it. Martha stepped outside. The wind moved through her braid. She stood beside Daniel, and for the first time she removed the silver ring from her first marriage. She didn't throw it away. She placed it gently inside the pocket of her apron. Then she took Daniel's hand. No speeches, no grand gestures, just a choice. The wind still howled. The sky remained gray. The dust never settled. But the West had not broken them. It had tried. It had circled. It had tested. And it had failed. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is come home early and stay. This is where the story ends. Not with a gunshot, not with revenge, but with a man in a brown duster coat, under a gray sky that never clears, standing beside a woman in a simple gray dress and white apron, protecting 7 children from a world that nearly swallowed them. The wind still blows across that ranch, but it no longer sounds like a warning. It sounds like survival. And that is the end.